So, good evening again. We're still enjoying very beautiful weather here on Bere Island. We have to say that just to convince you. Tomorrow we begin the Triduum, 3 sacred days of Holy Week, the Thursday, the Friday, the Saturday, opening up into the Easter Sunday. And tomorrow, Holy Thursday, we celebrate the part of the story which begins with the Last Supper, the institution of the Eucharist, and then the movement into the Passion and the death leading to the resurrection. And in the Gospel of John, the Last Supper is the starting point, but also, in a sense, the distillation of what the whole of Holy Week is about. The whole meaning of it is contained in the story of the Last Supper. And we won't go into all of that in detail tonight, but just the opening explanation that he gives is, I think, something that we can reflect on very profitably and deeply. The reason for this: Jesus knew that his hour had come and he must leave this world and go to the Father. So there's a great separation coming. Separation is something none of us like. Sometimes we even are frightened to be separated from the things we don't like, because it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. But any form of separation is, or leave-taking, evokes memories and triggers past associations. Even being separated from your car keys or your passport, if you're rushing around looking for them, can generate a high level of anxiety and fear because of the fear of loss or the fear of separation that hit you much earlier in life, perhaps. So the story begins with the prospect of the great separation, the separation that happens in death. But the separation is described as a leave-taking and a journey, a moving on, which is how, in the end, we learn to cope with the idea of separation in our own lives, that it's not an extinction, it's not a final separation, it is it's a bridge, actually. There's always a bridge, even though as you move into the experience of separation, there is the feeling that you are abandoned or stranded or lost. If you stay with it and keep awake, you come to recognize that there is a bridge across that abyss. So, but Jesus knows that his time for this separation has come. The hour has come. And then St. John says, he had always loved his own who were in the world, and now he was to show the full extent of his love. And that one sentence, I think, sums up the meaning of Holy Week. He had always loved his own who were in the world, so those with whom he had natural human bonds of love. But now, and this is the new dimension that's opening up, now he was to show the full extent of his love. So what does that mean? What does it mean to show the full extent of your love? When we are starting out on the journey of how to love, early in maybe adolescence, we are often very scared to reveal what we feel about someone whom we have fallen in love with or whom we are deeply attracted to. And there is a fear of showing just how much you are attracted, just how much you long for a connection and a reciprocity with that person. And as we learn the art of loving, and it's not an easy art to learn, but as we learn this art of loving, we realize that unless we do show how much we love, then there is no reciprocity, there is no connection, and there is no expansion of being. And the love that we feel, that we long to express and to enjoy and delight in, that love becomes trapped in the ego, trapped in our fears, trapped in our self-doubt or our guilt or whatever may be the bottlenecks that prevent us showing what we feel. So we learn in different ways and according to different temperaments and of course in different cultures, but we learn how to show the extent of our love. Without that extent, there is no reciprocity. And love demands to be acknowledged. We want those we love to know that we love them. And that's a risk, because we're then exposing ourselves to rejection. We're making ourselves vulnerable, hurtable in the most sensitive and vulnerable places that any human being can experience. So we learn very early in a very turbulent period of our lives, we begin to learn what Jesus has clearly learnt how to do at this moment in his life, to show how much he loves the people he is with. And we see immediately in the next section of the story, as he offers to wash the feet of his disciples, that's the way that he first begins to show the extent of his love. It does not meet with a good reception. It's not acknowledged. In fact, it's rejected. We see it in Peter. Again, Peter always in the wrong, not so infallible. And it is Peter, of course, who refuses to have his feet washed. Because what Jesus is showing is a love that is shocking to Peter. We can be shocked by some forms of love that don't fit into our pre-packaged or our conditioned ideas of what love should be like. We see it socially, culturally, and religiously in different forms in different ways. The religious rules about marriage or sexual orientation or marrying a second time and so on. There are a lot of restrictions in society and in religion on how love should be expressed and whether it should be expressed at all in some cases. And what we see here is a very typical human reaction to an encounter with the depth of love, or an intensity, or indeed a passion of love, which is very scary. Peter has glimpsed in this act of the washing of the feet, that Jesus is not as easily packageable or controllable as he might have thought. He's confused, as we are always confused when our boundaries, our horizons are challenged. When we get confused, we resist. we withdraw to a safe place, and we entrench ourselves in forms of security or forms of aggression sometimes, because to have those boundaries extended, to have those horizons burst open in the way that Jesus is doing, by inverting, turning upside down the perceived relationship, the power relationship that Peter imagined they had, that is deeply disturbing to our sense of self. And that's why people get so angry and so vindictive and so nasty, and religious people sometimes most of all, when those sexual or social or marital boundaries are challenged. We see it in many churches today. So Jesus is simply showing by this offer to wash their feet. It's more than an offer, it's an insistence that he washes their feet. But he's showing by this gesture how deep is his love for them. In other words, he is saying, you can no longer be in relationship to me in the safe way that you may have imagined. I am your Lord and Master, as he says to them in a few verses. And therefore you are safely embedded in a dependent or in an inferior relationship with me. He says, sure, I am your Lord and Master, I am your teacher. But in fact, that does not mean that you can remain in this safe, dependent position where you actually are unable to grow up. You're unable to become fully empowered with what I want to give you, what I want to empower you with. So I've got to, as it were, push you out of this nest that you feel secure in. And the way I'm going to do that is by doing something that is culturally and psychologically shocking to you. I'm going to wash your feet. Because it is not the role of a superior to wash the feet, to serve those who are dependent or inferior to him. And as I say, Peter reacts violently actually against this new phase of their relationship, and Jesus reacts to that with equal severity. He says, unless I do this, unless you accept this new relationship, it's over. The relationship is over. You better go and find someone else. So it's this way or no way. And anyway, Peter seems to give in at this point. And then, having washed their feet, and we will do this tomorrow night, of course, symbolically, sacramentally in the liturgy. Having washed their feet, he then says to them something that is really the beginning of the church. It's the beginning of the continuous community that he empowers. He says, if you call me Lord and Master, and indeed I am, and if I, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you must wash each other's feet. This is how you are to relate to each other, outside of the conventional and safe social patterns of power structures and power relationships that the ego constructs and competes in and is familiar with and is comfortable in. So you have to get out of that mindset altogether. There's a transcendence of the ego being illustrated here, fundamental. I was once in a situation where somebody had broken something, and it was the job of another person to come and clear up the mess. That was their role in the group, to come and clear up the mess. And the person who was supposed to clear up the mess could not do it. And they came and said to me, this is not my, I didn't do it, it's not my fault, and so why should I do it? And I couldn't believe really that I was hearing this, because it was so obviously in contradiction of everything that, all the values by which we were supposed to be living. And but this person couldn't see that. And so I said, okay, well, I said, come with me and I'll show you something. So I went in and I got a broom and I started to sweep it up myself. And I was expecting this person to say, after a couple of minutes, no, don't you do that, I'll do that. No, you shouldn't do that, Father. But he didn't. So I had to finish it off myself, as he sat there watching it. And it's always mystified me, the dynamic that was in operation at that moment. I don't know whether my grand gesture did any good at all. Actually, I don't think it did. But anyway, what you could see was that the ego is deeply entrenched in these power relationships. We want people to relate to us in ways that make us feel safe, even if that means that we are the inferior or they are the superior or whatever it may be. And the gift of love that Jesus is, the depth of which Jesus, the extent of which Jesus is showing here, is so deep and so frighteningly unpredictable, because it undermines and shakes the foundations of all of those secure, predictable power relationships. And as we move into these intense episodes in the story of Holy Week, just being conscious of the power relationships that are in play can be a very helpful way of interpreting the meaning and getting at them. The power relationships we see not only between Jesus and his disciples, but also, of course, between Jesus and the authorities with whom he's now going to have to deal. So we can see that the extent of the love that Jesus has for those who were his own in the world, those who were closest to him, is releases an energy, a dynamos, a power, that affects us both individually and psychologically, and also culturally and socially. And we cannot separate those, we cannot build a firewall between the personal change that happens in us as we fall into this depth of love revealed to us, and at a personal psychological level, we cannot build a firewall between that personal transformation and the society, the culture, the world that we're living in. The extent of his love, or the love that is being revealed, is deeper than the difference between the personal and the social or the cultural. It reaches so deep down into the nature of reality that everything is affected by it. And then we get a glimpse of what is happening here when Jesus says, you have called me Lord and Master, and maybe that's what you still want to continue calling me, but I will call you servants no longer. I no longer see you in that dependent or inferior role. I call you my friends, because I have revealed to you or shared with you everything that I have learnt or have received from my Father. So what is he saying here? Something quite extraordinary. First of all, he is offering, if we believe it, he's offering everything that he is, everything that he has learned of himself and of the Father through his own human journey. And he is eager, he is longing to share that, just as an adolescent in love wants to share his or her passion with the object of his passion. So Jesus is passionate and intense about wanting to share himself without boundaries, without limitations, with those whom he now calls his friends. And the revolution in religious understanding and in religious experience that is happening here at this moment is we should stop and take note of it, because our relationship to God through the sharing of himself that Jesus is doing at this moment changes. Our relationship with God changes. We've always been very comfortable, whether we were building stone circles in West Cork or worshipping the Blessed Sacrament on the altar in the church, or going to temples or synagogues or mosques. We've always been very comfortable with a God who is over there or outside of us and at a comfortable distance. A God whom we can feel we can maybe manipulate or we can use to make ourselves feel better, but a God whom we don't need to get too close to. We just need to know how to handle him. But and you can never be friends with a God like that. You can never really love a God like that, because there's always going to be this element of fear, but you choose to be in this submission, the state of submission and state of fear, because it gives you a certain kind of security, a certain kind of distance. But you can never really experience God as love, or yourself as loved by God in that way. Or it comes across such a huge distance, so much interpretation and so much imagination needs to be done in order to convey that across the distance between you and God, that it's a rather impersonal kind of love. It's a sort of something you hear about and you're reassured about, but you don't actually feel it personally. You've never actually felt loved by God. It's just you were told that God is love, but watch out at the same time, because he may punish you. So what is happening here is that this distance, this safe distance, this power distance between ourselves and the source of our being, the mysterious ground of being that Jesus calls the Father, that we try to understand as God, mysterious word, but the distance between us and God is now eliminated. And it's eliminated in a relationship that is immediately recognizable to us in our most human way, which is friendship. Who is frightened of a friend? If you're frightened of someone, they cannot be a friend. Even if you're frightened of rejection, or you're frightened of disapproval, or you're frightened of rejection, whatever, that or betrayal, the level of fear in your relationship diminishes the friendship. If you say you feel someone to be your friend, you actually feel that whatever happens, whatever you do or fail to do, the friendship remains. The friendship would be strong enough to take that event or that disaster or that revelation. Now, we can never be 100% certain of that, but as relationships grow, as friendships develop over time, we can find that the love in the friendship becomes so strong that it casts out the fear. Perfect love casts out fear, St. John says. So as relationships deepen, as friendships grow, and many different forms of friendship, of course, as friendships grow, the love intensifies and fear has no place. So suddenly, at this moment in the story, where Jesus is about to show the full extent of his love, or is showing it, he plunges us into a new form of relationship in which it is wrong of us to feel fear. It is a betrayal of him now, which is a rejection of him, in fact, for us to feel fear. Fear has no place if we are conscious of the extent of love that he is showing to us. Now, the question is, how do we feel about that? Is that what we sense as a personal meaning in the story that we're reading at this moment? And I think we grow over time into that personal discovery of that sense that this is not just something written in the scriptures, it is actually still a living and present communication. So we're not just remembering, I was talking about memory today, we're not just remembering a beautiful and dramatic moment in the upper room where Jesus did something symbolic on the night before he died, but we are actually remembering, bringing into the present, making present something that is actual to us and still is relevant to us, can still and will still transform us just as it transformed them over time. And that we may react just like Peter, and just like Peter, we have to learn to get over it. We have to learn what this offer means, what this new friendship means. And I think even if we've just read it, if we've just heard about it and taken a few minutes out of our busy schedule to think about it, we are changed. We can never look at God in the same way. We can never understand the spiritual journey in the same way. We have been shown something. He's shown us the extent of his love. He's shown us something that we may not act on, but we can never forget, because it has actually changed our ways of perception. And it's this showing, this demonstration or illustration of the nature of God and the nature of reality that is the dynamic really of the whole of the Holy Week story, and especially the intense 3 days that we will be beginning soon. It's a showing. It's not forcing itself upon us, it's just showing us. It's a bit like, when you're trying to work out a difficult, well, as a child you were working on a sum or difficult math problem that you couldn't calculate, and then the teacher showed you how to do it. And you now see. It's been shown to you. And now you just have to put it into practice. You don't have to believe it because it's obvious. You've just been shown how it works. Now you have to see whether you can do the next one by yourself. You know how to do it, and you then have to do it. So there's a showing here, a showing of the truth, which affects us deeply and radically and unforgettably, something we don't forget because it changes us. What we also see here in this extent of His love is that we are contained in that love now. That's how big an extent it is. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any point in doing a Holy Week retreat or taking the religious experience of Easter very seriously or personally. We just do a course on it and write a paper on it. But if it is we ourselves who are included in this unimaginable extent of love, then we had better wake up to it and see how it is changing us. One of the things that is happening here is, of course, the gift of self. Well, the essential thing that's happening is the gift of self. And Jesus says He wants to share with His friends everything He has learned from the Father. That's what He's saying. I want to share everything I am with you, which is what love always wants to do. And what happens when we are touched by the energy of such a gift? We don't receive something in the gift of self from another person. We don't receive something we can put in the bank, put a price on, or just put on our CV, or that we feel in some way proud of or enhanced by, or our reputation has been increased or whatever. So what is it we receive when we receive the gift of another's self? Well, I think what we receive is a new sense of self ourselves. And what we are empowered by in that gift of self is the ability to do the same. To make a gift of ourselves. And that's why He tells His disciples, what I have done to you, you must now do to each other. Otherwise, the game is over. Otherwise, there's no point in all of this. The whole point of this is not that you just put me on a pedestal and worship me from a safe distance. The point is that what I have done and shown you has changed your minds, changed the way you see things, and therefore changed your range of feeling and your self-confidence, if you like. You are empowered now, and you have to use that in your relationships with each other. And that's why it is such a difficult lesson to learn. Because He's not saying just be nice to each other. He's not saying just do good works and always do things that please people. Try to be as popular as possible. And so that everybody will speak nicely about you. And when you get to heaven, St. Peter will say, yeah, you've got a very high popularity rating, we'll put you in business class. So what is being asked of us now is not just to be nice. In fact, this is the end of niceness, really. This is about, well, I suppose we can still be nice as well, but it's not about being nice, it's about giving of oneself. And if, having received this gift of self or been touched by it, we don't open ourselves to the full extent of what we've been offered, then we are really blowing it. We are really we are making the fundamental mistake of life. The deeper we go into this transmission, or this gift of self, the more we are challenged to make this gift of self to others, and to find the particular ways, because every relationship is different, the particular ways in which we are able to do that. Okay. The next great moment in this story now is, of course, the Eucharist, although St. John doesn't make such a big deal about the Eucharist as the other evangelists. He puts most of his symbolic energy here into the washing of the feet. It's the same thing. The washing of the feet is expressing the same thing as the offering of himself through the ritual of the Passover meal, the bread and the wine, into which he pours himself. And so that ritual, which becomes for us the Eucharist, that ritual becomes a means of his transmission of self, his gift of self. And beyond that, of course, on the Friday is his death and the crucifixion. But each of these stages are really different manifestations or illustrations, perhaps at deeper and deeper levels, of the same dynamic. The gift, the offering of self. And whenever we do offer, or feel empowered to offer ourselves, we are taking exactly the same risk that Jesus is taking here. And if we don't take that risk, we cannot be alive anymore. And we will know that we're not alive because we've seen what's at stake. We've seen it. Better that we had not seen it than that we see it and don't respond to it. So how does this relate to our meditation? Well, in our meditation, we are doing two things. We are opening ourselves in the most simple and direct way that we can, through simply being, and accepting who we are and being who we are at this moment. We are opening ourselves to the full extent of his love. And at the same time, and that's what the mantra allows us to do by leading us into that place of pure openness, poverty of spirit, of pure of pure active receptivity. But in doing that, we are also allowing ourselves to be empowered. If we don't get up from our meditation over time, better able to translate that experience into our human relationships, then something is missing. Something didn't connect. And both at the psychological level, but also at the deeper spiritual level, our meditation is eradicating the fear that is the real enemy of love, the real force that prevents us from receiving the full extent of love, and certainly prevents us from giving ourselves in love to others in different forms. So, at a very psychological level, you may find after you've been meditating for some time that your fears are no longer so intense, no longer controlling you. Even little phobias will begin to diminish, and one day you'll realize that you are actually free from some fears that you were controlled by before. And you'll suddenly realize, you're trying to think, I wonder when I was stopped being frightened of X, Y, or Z. I can't quite remember, but I can now definitely feel that I am free from it. So that's just a fairly superficial, very useful, but a fairly superficial illustration of what is happening at a much deeper level in us, where the fear of love itself is being dissolved, and we are being empowered both to receive and to give this primal energy, the energy of love, the primal energy of all creation. And it's why in the Christian tradition the work of contemplation, the work we're doing in meditation, has always been seen as not an intellectual work, not even an ascetical work primarily, but as the work of love. And love, as we have just seen, has these two sides to it, the giving and the receiving.